Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Patrick Lyons. Grateful that you've joined us. I'm here with two of my friends, colleagues, and partners in crime, as I like to call them. Patsy Feeman, how are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. And Mr. Leb Tannenbaum, back from a couple of week vacation. You went off the grid, didn't you?
I did. Off the grid in the redwoods and back.
Yeah.
And I'm doing well and happy to be here.
Rested and ready to go?
More or less.
Good. Well, it's okay. So today's topic for our listener, we're actually going to dive into a very relevant and timely topic, the topic of quiet quitting. One of my favorite sayings in business is the only thing worse than someone who quits and leaves is someone who quits and stays. And in essence, that is kind of the definition of quiet quitters. These are folks who are not leaving the organization. These are people who, in essence, have decided to do the bare minimum. They still come to work every day, but they've lowered their own bar to do the bare minimum and put boundaries between work and personal. Now, before you assume, listener or CEO, before you assume that this has something to do with the young people of America or American entitlement or American culture, in a recent Gallup study, Gallup did a worldwide engagement survey and found that while only 30% of American workers consider themselves engaged, globally, that number drops to 13%. So in fact, engaged US employees outpace their global peers by a more than 2-to-1 margin. So this is not just a US problem, it is a global problem. For a little bit of context, I thought we would start with the definition of quiet quitting. This comes from dictionary.com, one of my go-tos anytime I need to look something up. But according to dictionary.com, quiet quitting, it does not use quitting, meaning resigning from one's job in the literal sense, but rather to suggest that a worker has quit or decided to stop doing certain parts of their job, such as tasks that they have taken on beyond their role. The word quiet suggests that they have done so secretly or without informing their boss or manager. In other words, these are workers who engage in quiet quitting. Typically, they've just stopped working as much as they had been before. Now, the reason I wanted to look that up myself is the more I've learned about quiet quitting, the more I've realized this is not a new issue. This is an old issue. You could almost argue as long as there's been business, there has been this issue. It's just had different names. And the one many organizations are more commonly familiar with is disengagement. So if you think quiet quitting is in essence the same as disengaged, and here is, according to the Collins Online Dictionary, the definition of disengaged. Disengaged is when someone is disengaged from something, they are not as involved with it as you would expect. You can lay that on top of a quiet quitter as the CEO, as the boss. You're thinking they're doing job X when really they've scaled back and they're not. So they're not as involved as you might think. Patsy, Leb, I'm excited to have you guys here. This is a topic right up, I would like to say right up each of our alleys. But for the two of you, I know both of you have extensive experience working with organizations on engagement, on organization culture. Patsy, offline, before we started rolling this episode, when you were talking about quiet quitting and the statistics, you saw a statistic recently that gave you cause for concern. Can you share what was the statistic and why the concern?
The statistic was that the majority of workers in the quiet quitting arena are those workers that are 35, 40 years of age. So it's the younger millennials and the Gen Zs. And like you said earlier, Patrick, you could go, oh yeah, it's easy to point to those folks. But the real message here for CEOs and for those in senior leadership positions is that's starting to be the majority of your workforce. If you look at who's actually getting the work done in your organization, it's starting to be this demographics. And this demographics is wanting something different from work than perhaps those of us that have been in the workforce a little bit longer, that are willing to go beyond, or that think we have to go beyond. So if you think about the majority of workforce being in this demographics, then you want to engage them. You want to get them in an environment where they're contributing and where they know what they're contributing. So that's why it was a concern for me, and should be for you, the listener. Concern
Right.
for you.
Lev, what have you seen? Again, as I said in the opener, this is not a new problem. It just has a new name. What have you seen organizationally through the years that that contributes maybe to some of this quiet quitting or disengagement?
Well, the largest context I'll go to is culture, organizational culture. There's something perhaps unintended in corporate culture that has not, as an example, intentionally cared for their people the way people are wanting to be cared for now. And I think those cultures that are recognizing that the problem has been spoken of before as disengagement, it's been there before, but there are also some new things in the world today that people are having to deal with, very obviously, like mental health or physical health. There's been a pandemic. There's conflict in the world. There's, concerns, the supply chains, depending on what, industry you're in, caused all kinds of chaos. Well, that's impacting people at every age and stage of their life, but it's also perhaps impacting differently or more some of the younger workforce. So part of the question, I think, is how much do you know about your people? How much does your culture talk about how much they care? Are managers well trained? I mean, there are lots of topics, right? Are we directing and not listening? How much more important is it to be a very active listener as a manager, as a leader? And we know from all of our work with Denison Consulting and the Denison Culture Survey that leaders have the greatest impact on an organization's culture. I don't know how frequently leaders reflect, step back, pause, and say, how are we doing? How intentional are we about what matters to the people that actually deliver our goods, our product, serve our customers, whatever the case may be. So, I'll pause there for a minute so, we can all jump in, but I do think intentionally paying attention to a culture is not set once. It's alive.
It's a living, breathing organism.
A living, breathing, changing, intentional or not, very important environment that your people work in.
Yeah. You made a statement that I want to come back to in a minute. I want to set up a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to dive into this topic. Obviously, we've started. We're going to talk a little bit about ways that organizations are trying to combat quiet quitting, and why we potentially have some real concerns about some of those ways, right? What not to do. And then we are going to get practical, as you know we like to do, with where we think you can lean in and start trying to address this issue. But Leb, we're just talking about the culture, the Denison Culture Survey, and yes, that statement has come up on our show before, that leaders have the greatest impact on organization culture. So hold that thought. I opened with the recent Gallup survey said that at least half of U.S. workers, at least half, probably more, is what it estimated. At least half of workers fall into the quiet quitting category. It's very possible, I'm asking, it's very possible that our listener, a frustrated CEO, could be in that half quiet quitters, right? And what impact, if leaders have the greatest impact on organization culture, what impact would that have?
There wouldn't be a lot of quiet quitters. There'd be a lot of quitters.
Yeah. I want to. So if you are listening and you in that moment of, I don't know, honesty and reflection can acknowledge, yeah, that is me. There is no judgment here in this. This is not about pointing fingers at you for quiet quitting. I've never met anybody who is disengaged and happy about it. Disengagement is not a place that I go willingly or happily. It's usually it's a coping mechanism. It's a defense mechanism. It's a place that I go to because it hurts too much to stay invested and stay right. Continue to think things are going to change when they don't. But it does speak to, instead of judgment, more of a reminder that you as the leader, if that's where you are, you're going to be wearing that on your sleeve. Your people will see it. So, Leb, what is the importance of, where does self-care come in? I know you've been doing a lot lately on the topic of self-care. So if I am a listener, if I am a CEO and I am feeling like a quiet quitter, maybe even stuck, I'm the CEO, I can't quit, but I'm just not feeling it every day. Where does self-care come in?
It's big. I'm gonna take a little step to the side with that and go back 25 years when we created this extraordinary coaching program, and we created a continuum for coaching. And at the very end of the continuum, and it relates very much, I think, to what we're talking about, was people who were in the place that we defined as resigned hopelessness. Which is they're in their job, they need the money, and they feel trapped, or they have a bad manager, or their leader is abusive, whatever, and they don't think they can afford to leave the job, and that's kind of a whole new thing that people may think more freely about leaving a job or even a career. So when you're in a place of resigned hopelessness, you don't coach people with rah-rah. You listen. You seek to understand. You create psychological safety so that people can talk about where they're at, why they feel resigned, what's causing them to feel like things are hopeless. And you look for a way to move them further along the continuum to engagement. And I think we're finding that it takes time and it takes some training. But in general, in terms of now shifting just to self-care, if I got to take care of myself and I'm in a situation that demands more than I'm willing to give, I might just fake it. And kind of see how much I can get away with and be that quiet quitter, because I'm trying to protect my mental health. I'm trying to draw boundaries for my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's already been wildly interrupted by the pandemic. And it's been wildly interrupted by the supply chain, depending on what industry you're in, where it's being greatly impacted by inflation. And if we're just setting all that stuff on the side and saying, yeah, but we're okay, so why wouldn't you be happy? Well, it's more I think it's more individual now than it's ever been.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we talk about diversity and inclusion and equity, but really everybody's different. I'm different if I lost someone that I cared for in the pandemic.
Mm.
If I'm your leader or your manager and I don't know about that, I might not understand why you seem a little disengaged.
Mm.
But I might be able to help you get engaged if I can be that vulnerable. And if I can invite that vulnerability. So it's self-care. And this is true for leaders too. This is true for CEOs too, right? If all of a sudden your kids are home 24/7, even if it's with your partner, your spouse, whatever the case may be, there's a different dynamic and tension
Mm-hmm.
that you have to deal with. So the whole definition to me of self-care has just broadened. And then, how do we do it? Let's get practical, about that. But I do think self-care is more important than it's ever been before. And people are, for lots of different reasons, recognizing if I don't take care and my job doesn't take care to some degree of me, in a healthy way, why wouldn't I be a quiet quitter if I feel like I don't have the flexibility to go jump jobs right now?
It's interesting that you raise that because as you research this topic, or as we prepared for this episode, one of the perspectives I was surprised to see is, Patsy, you mentioned the 35 and 40-year-olds and younger, that a large part of that segment of workers, the ones, in fact, who have quiet quit, they're still working, but they've put these very hard boundaries up between professional and personal. They see quiet quitting as a great thing. That was interesting to me. They don't see it as a problem. They see it as a very good thing because they see it as protecting their physical health, their emotional health, their mental health, protecting my family time, my personal time, my me time. This is my way. Quiet quitting is my answer to self-care, to the need. It's my answer to the need for self-care. The question is, I think as I was, I don't know, peeling that back in my own head, how do I arrive at that conclusion? How do I arrive at that belief? Did they arrive there because they feel like the companies that they work for don't care about their personal, that it's not a shared responsibility to help me have a balance between work and home, that it's not a share, that my employer doesn't care about my mental health, my physical health. Therefore, I'm taking matters into my own hands. I'm scaling back and I'm putting these hard boundaries up. Patsy, what are you thinking?
My thoughts are it's more a myth in our culture about what it means to be an employer in the workforce.
Mm. What do you mean by that?
And this generation is saying, I'm not going to buy into that. And that to get ahead, in corporate, in the workforce, you climb the ladder, you go beyond, you give it all for the company. There's a number of myths about what does it mean to be an employee these days.
Mm.
And I think there is a couple of generations now in the workforce are saying that's not how I want to live my life. Yeah, I want to enjoy my work, but I also want to enjoy my life. That hasn't been business as usual for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Probably since they started making Ford motor cars, and the assembly lines. It's kind of been the DNA of the workforce. That's my thoughts on that. And that's for the listener. That's a real reckoning, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And some companies may not care.
Mm.
But there are companies, a couple that we work with that do care. So I wouldn't. So
I'm curious. Can you afford? Honest question. It's not a leading question. Can you afford to not care? Do you think you can? It's kind of a conjecture question, but do you think that you can be rooted in the historic, I don't want to say old style thinking, but previous, what dominated our DNA in business? Can you stay rooted in that and survive?
My bias is no. And I think statistically, you're going to see a lot of people that still think, heck yes.
They're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, they're going to do it anyway. It's business as usual.
Yeah.
But our last guest, Abe Tannenbaum, was talking about a new model for how we can care and still do business.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to start to look at what are those new models that allow us to do both. Have a culture of care and have a culture of productivity.
Right. Yeah, Abe was talking about, B Corps and people, planet, and profit, and that you actually will increase your profitability in today's world if you pay really close attention to people and the planet.
Right.
Because the planet can be purposeful and the people are, wildly important. And so I agree with you, Patsy. I think there are some myths out there, but I also think that there's, if you don't test the model, you don't know exactly how well you're doing. So if you never do a culture survey, as an example, you can say, yeah, things feel pretty good around here. We got a great culture. I think there's a lot of companies out there that are attempting to show their employees that they care, but they're not testing the model. And I think it's different. I think there's, so let's say you get more PTO. Well, that's great. And if you think that's the answer, it's probably not. Because I think what's changed is that, that can affect everybody. But I think it's still become more personal. It's still, what about me? And so I think there are a lot of companies that are trying to be happy. We know one company that was, on a previous episode, they're doing a great job with lightening up the culture and having fun. And they're not, they have great retention rate. They're attracting talent. So something there is working, but they are testing it also. And I think there is a lot of good intended programmatic kinds of things that are happening. But I don't know that a lot of them are really addressing what we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about psychological safety as an example.
Okay.
Right. Patrick, Patsy, we all work with helping leaders and managers create psychological safety so that people can have open and honest conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I referred back to, what if somebody's down? What if somebody's in resigned hopelessness? Are they going to want to talk to you if you haven't created the safety to open up and share that they're in a rut or whatever, they feel like their job is in a rut and they don't know how to get out of it? So they're just, going through the motions.
It's a great question. For me, what comes to mind at the importance of psychological safety is, I said earlier, I've never met anybody who's disengaged and happy about it. And they don't start there. No one is, I'm going to make this absolute statement, but I'm willing to bet very, very few people, maybe no one, is hired and on day one they're disengaged, right? You get there over time. And what usually moves me to become disengaged is when I've stayed in conflict too long, and or I've stuffed my conflict because it's not safe to be in conflict in this place. A lot of times I get to remind managers, conflict is a great thing, right? We shy away from conflict. No one loves it. I don't love it. I don't even like it sometimes, but conflict is a great thing because it tells me that you are invested. This matters to you. You're emotionally invested in this enough to fight me on it or negotiate or plead your case or come with some oomph behind it, right? In order for the conflict to either contribute, well, in order for it to contribute to our organization, move us forward, we have to be able to navigate through that in a healthy way, and that requires psychological safety. Which, to me, if you're not familiar with psychological safety, it's really just creating the kind of environment where it's safe for people to say whatever needs to be said. In the absence of that, if we are navigating through conflict in an unhealthy way, or I get punished for raising issues and frustrations, for trying to be invested emotionally, and maybe I'm not necessarily coming about it the right way, but you as the leader can still listen and ask questions and try to help me get to the root of it and engage me in a healthy way. Because if not, then that's where disengagement happens. All of those issues are still there. All of the things that frustrated me are still there, but I have disconnected from them emotionally because, as I said earlier, it just hurts too much to fight. Like, that's where you find yourself saying, why bother? Nothing changes here. It doesn't matter. They don't care. So I've disconnected. Those things are still there. They still frustrate me. They still bother me, but not at that level. If you want to prevent me from going there, that's where psychological safety comes in. Is you have to create the kind of environment where I can say it the wrong way, and that's a teaching moment for me. Or, right, you can listen past the words and try to hear and recognize that my conflict is a sign that I care and I am invested in. And extend that to everybody in the room so that we are navigating through conflict and nobody's stuffing it and having to withdraw because of it.
That's good. It's really good.
So we've mentioned a couple of things here around some of the competencies that managers can learn or leaders can learn to re-engage their employees. What are some others? We just talked about psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
What are some others that come to mind? Psychological safety leads to trust. That's another one.
Trust, big one.
And, resolving conflict or addressing conflict is a component of feedback, but maybe not the only thing. So what are some other skills or behaviors that leaders and managers could use or need to know in order to start to engage their people?
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that comes to mind for me, and this takes me back again a number of years, doing leadership, an off-site 5-day leadership development course with the top 200 leaders in a very large company. And it became obvious especially one of those weeks, that these leaders really struggled with facilitating good meetings. And so we had like a small team of us who were OD consultant type folks, offered to actually come into their meetings for maybe 4 to 6 weeks and help build their skill, not just in agenda building, but in picking up on body language and reading signs and, managing conflict when it comes up in a healthy way, all of these kinds of facilitative leadership skills. And we thought they were going to jump on it. There were like 14 leaders in the room. No one said yes. We want you. The reason they said was, if you get to this level and you can't facilitate a good meeting, I don't want anybody to come in here and show that I need help facilitating
Mm.
meetings because I have this, sense that I'm supposed to be able to do that. So we were talking about competency. I think one of the competencies could be facilitative leadership around learning that it takes some training, it takes some work to not just throw an agenda together and run through the agenda. And if I'm disengaged and I'm in meeting after meeting after meeting and they all are pretty flat,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not going to help.
Nope.
I agree. You hear that from employees that they're in meetings and they don't know why. They feel like the meetings are 2 and 3 times longer than they need to be. And I would encourage the listener right now, if you haven't gone back and listened to episode, I forget what episode it was the episode checking in on high performance. Our own Leb Tannenbaum spoke eloquently with a lot of great examples about how to run, how to check in with your people to completely change the tenor of a meeting, to make them more effective, and I think engage your people. So there's a very practical, go back and do that. Patsy, I think another one, and again, some of these are so basic, but I think we're getting to what a listener, what a CEO can do to address this issue, to resolve this quiet quitting, or at least combat it. Some of these seem a little basic, but the more communicative managers can be with their people. I recently, in a conversation with a pretty high ranking, I know who it was. A few episodes ago when we had Randy Mueller on, previous conversation, and he said, how many years was he working for the Chargers, the San Diego Chargers? And he never had a conversation, not one conversation, with anybody above him, with any higher up in the organization. What message does that send? I wonder if he were here, if he would. No one wants to admit that they are a quiet quitter. But what would he say? What might he say that the impact was on his engagement? Feeling like, I'm just a cog in a wheel and nobody cares, and you get no face time. That's absolutely, that's something that a leader or a manager can make sure they're doing, is just check in frequently with your people.
That reminds me of a CEO that I worked with who I thought was just stunning in this one way. He made it his business to know every single employee by first name, but he went further. He made it his business to know their family members' names. And there's a big difference when you walk down the hall and somebody says hi, and then you walk down the hall and somebody says, hi, Patrick.
Right.
Hi, Patsy. How are you today?
Right.
And I mean, it was not a small task. Me once having taught kindergarten, I had to make sure I got every single kid's name right every day. But there were only 20 of them or 15 of them. You get into the 2, 3, 4, 500s. And the fact so that's a practical thing that leaders can do.
Yeah.
Right.
And I forget which that also came up in a prior episode. We were talking about how, as a CEO, that gesture of saying, hey, Patsy, hey, Leb, that means so much more than it would from just a peer. It just does, because, wow, the CEO knows my name. The CEO knows my dog's name, right? Or the CEO asked how my kids are doing. That matters.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking of this right now. If it's stupid, we'll throw it out. But it's not. Here's the difference between kind of being and doing. Dental offices do a really good job of sending you some card on your birthday, but the being part isn't there. It's just something that they do.
Right.
And I go, oh, okay, I got a birthday card from my dentist. And I like dentists. They're very important. So don't get me wrong. But you know what? It's time to get personal. I think that's part of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. And for some people, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But if you're a manager or a leader and I guess part of the learning and the training is learn about styles, learn that people have different styles, get more comfortable with interacting, because that's what helps people get re-engaged or get engaged or be feeling vital and active.
It's reminding me of that there's in this hybrid environment with a new couple of generations coming
Mhm.
into the workforce, that the way we've been doing business, and I referred to it earlier, is not sufficient to do business in our current environment. So it's not like there's something wrong, although, you don't want 50% of your workforce in a quiet quitters mode. There's something missing in the way we're doing business now to really accommodate and honor the workforce that is now becoming the predominant, segment of the workforce.
Mhm.
We probably wouldn't have talked about care 15 years ago, Patrick. We probably wouldn't have talked about 10 years, 5 years ago.
Right.
But it is something that is missing now that the workforce is wanting.
Mhm. Mhm.
There was a recent study that thousands of employees interviewed, and one of the two things they said they wanted most from their leaders was empathy,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of what we're talking about here. People want to be known as individuals.
Mhm.
Mm.
And that's a new way of leading.
Yeah.
And you don't throw the other stuff out. You still have to produce results. You still have to do all that. So it's kind of a yes and.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that brings up onboarding, right? People are working really hard to find kind of the right talent, maybe the right culture fit. And then if the onboarding is you kind of dropped in a slot, it's pretty easy to start to be disengaged pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, I think another practical thing to do is look at your how you onboard the people that you're hiring. And again, it reminds me of a CEO who made it their business. Like once there were like 10 new employees or 20 new employees, they would have a lunch. This person would have a lunch with all those people, and they would talk and get to know each other and break bread. I think that was another thing that someone mentioned in a previous episode. It's the value of breaking bread together. So, but it said something to people without having to say, "We care,"
Right.
or that I want to get to know you, or I want to know who's working here. Because the CEO just, was constantly breaking bread with. Once we hit a certain number of new people, and that people knew that it became part of the culture.
So the concept of hybrid work has come up a couple of times. We've used the phrase, and I want to talk about 3 ways that we have seen organizations try to address this issue of quiet quitting that are that we have concerns about. How's that? And the lead in there is hybrid work, because I think one of the things that a lot of CEOs are believing that the problem is worse because we are now in this hybrid environment. The problem is worse. It's exacerbated by the fact that our people are no longer all within the same 4 walls. Interestingly enough, one of the Gallup surveys showed that the percentage of quiet quitters is only 2% higher for hybrid workers, for remote workers, than it is for on-site workers. So potentially dispelling that
Hmm.
my the people on site within these walls, they're more engaged. I have fewer quiet quitters in the building than I do at home. Not true. So one of the ways that companies are trying to combat this problem is by bringing everybody back into the office. I'm going to ask this, kind of throw this out to both of you. What's the danger of thinking that that is the solution? We'll just bring everybody back and that will fix the problem.
Well, I think part of it is people don't know why they're coming back into the office. So people come back into the office, but they don't understand the value of for them or for the organization. I mean, when we had Dan, this is a day of going down memory lane here. When we had Dan Dennison on, he was talking about their employees come in, what he'd say, 2 days a week, but he wants to be really clear about why he's inviting, why people are coming together face to face and what it is they're to accomplish when they're together.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that more and more. Why are we together? What are we trying to accomplish? And then do we have the tools to accomplish it?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I think another thing is kind of back to the personal life piece. Why am I driving? Whatever my commute time is, why am I driving in if what I can do at home?
Right.
Why am I spending money for lunch? Why? What difference is that really making, other than maybe it's taking, if it's a 30-minute commute, it's taking an hour of my day, and I didn't do anything that I wouldn't do at home,
Right.
other than joke around or maybe hang out with some people that are also asking the same question.
Yeah.
So yeah, but if you are bringing your people in, maybe that's also just underlining what Patsy said, that may be kind of a new requirement, is that it better be, it needs to be for a good reason.
Yeah. Yes, and I think the false belief there is that my people are disengaged because they're not physically here in the building. And we've talked about how this is an age-old issue. This is not a brand new issue. It has a new name, but people have been disengaged in business for as long as there have been businesses. So having them all within the walls, that doesn't guarantee engagement. You still have to figure out what are the underlying issues in our culture. Where are the shortcomings in our communication or our leadership or management of these people? What is preventing our employees from engaging, and just bringing them back into the office without fixing those things? Now, instead of being quiet quitters, they're going to be quiet, angry quitters, because I can be disengaged at home. Now you're putting me on the road. Now I'm angry about that. And to your point, now that's infringing on the whole point of quiet quitting is so I have more personal time.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have less of that. So Patsy, you said off air, that's just going to make them quit instead of quiet quit. Which a manager may, or a CEO may think, well, that solves the problem, but does it? Because if you still haven't fixed the underlying issues in the organization, you replace that person and it won't be long before you have the same problem. Okay, so that actually leads into the second thing that we are seeing organizations do to combat quiet quitting. They're firing people. They're finding their quiet quitters. They're finding the ones that have disengaged, who just aren't highly, they're not rah employees anymore. And they're letting them go. What's the danger of that? Why won't that work?
Well, one practical piece is they've spent a lot of money to recruit people, and they spent money to train people and onboard people and get people into the job. And it's not very practical in terms of just fiscal management to seek out and then not have maybe the conversation that could shift that person's engagement. and it also has an impact. It means generally someone else on whatever team that person might have been on is going to have to do more work until someone else is hired and onboarded and trained. And there's a those are just the two kind of practical things that come right to mind, as well as what's the intention behind that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Meta I read yesterday was basically saying they've issued a 30-day notice to X number of people, and you have 30 days to find another position in the company or leave. It's like I only read the headlines. I don't pretend that I really understand all that, but what's behind that, or what's impact is that going to have on the culture, or how much of this is fear-based, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like, okay, it's like and it makes me think of when I was a kid, and I used to have to weed all around my house. So every Saturday I'd wake up and I'd have all this weeding to do. It's like the weeds come back and instead of trying to figure out a better landscaping process, yes, or whatever. So you want to spend your life in the weeds, so to speak. We talk about leaders who get stuck in the weeds. I don't know. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I know it's happening.
I mean, what comes to my mind is that sounds like, just from what you described, a very reactive response, as opposed to, so in the moment, reactive, got to keep moving, yep, as opposed to a proactive, which is, I'm going to step aside and really take a moment, pause, as Lev talked to us a couple episodes ago, and really reflect on where are we headed, what's our vision, what's our strategy,
yeah,
and how is this affecting, what are we really wanting to accomplish in our culture? Do we care whether our people are engaged?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I also think that by firing your quiet quitters, it's pointing the finger of blame at them. And I say this to every manager who listens. Tools are much better when they are mirrors than when they are hammers. So rather than me beat you over the head with this hammer of engagement, why won't you engage? The question to ask in the mirror is, what do I need to do so that my people can engage? Right? It's a me problem, not a them problem. If they're disengaged, what has to change here? And if I fire them and hire new people, but I don't look in the mirror and figure out what I have to do to create a different environment, 6 months from now, I'm going to have brand new disengaged employees. Haven't fixed the problem.
Right. And that's on the employee level. If you think about how quickly one's reputation gets out into the work environment, you're going to develop a reputation for being a company that hires and fires.
Absolutely.
How easy is it to hire good folks there?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk then now the third way that this one's fascinating and terrifying to me. The third way that companies are trying to address this quiet quitting issue is by increasing their surveillance, their tracking of what employees are doing. Patsy, I see you giggling.
I'm cringing, actually.
It's terrifying. So they're just like a hacker would put some kind of spyware on your computer to steal your accounts and passwords. Employers are purchasing software and putting it on their employees' devices that, in some cases, it takes a screenshot every 10 minutes. It tracks, some are literally logging every keystroke. So you can go back and see what an employee is writing in an email. It tracks the number of emails that are sent and read and received, and tracks all of their activity. One of as I was reading about that, there was a really great quote from the CEO of Microsoft who said, activity does not equal productivity. So you can track my activity. I'm now adding to that. You can track my activity. I can be on the computer all day long and not be productive at all. Leb, you are the author of something called the Trust Course. And listener, if you're interested in learning more about that, increasing trust in your organization, repairing broken trust, absolutely reach out to Leb because he's got a great tool. But talk about, what does surveillance do? That's good for trust, isn't it?
It's one of the three, to me, it's the most onerous one we are talking about. I will say, on the other side of it, working in a construction organization, that the tracking that they put into the vehicles can be helpful in the performance of a job when they know that someone is running for supplies and or whether they're caught in traffic, or so that they can call a customer or a client and say, hey, we're caught in traffic. There are some benefits to some tracking, and obviously they're going to know if the person went somewhere else and spent 45 minutes somewhere else before they went to the job, or whatever the case may be. But they don't use it for that reason. They use it to try to help increase productivity, and in a way, help people communicate when things are happening. So I can see potentially there's some value in some of this, but I think it all comes back to, what's your intention? Is it to spy and control and then weed out, or try to, measure activity as productivity, and what you just mentioned, Patrick, or, those kinds of things? I personally would not work somewhere if it was known to me that surveillance was part of the job.
Mm-hmm.
I just wouldn't want to work there.
Yep.
And it does what it says in terms of trust is, I mean, kind of bottom line is, you don't trust me.
Right.
And the other thing is that everybody knows right now, part of this balancing act that we're all in is that people are working after dinner or later. And I don't know exactly, how surveillance fits into all that. I haven't thought it through, but if it was for me to help me protect my self-care. Oh, and I said, oh gosh, I just realized I looked at, like you get, how much were you on the screen on your Apple phone, right?
Screen time.
Right, screen time. And if like, oh dang, I was on way too much, I'm going to back off and be more intentional about it. Well, that could be helpful data. But the other side of that is if it's to see if I'm being productive, if I'm doing my, my job as you have outlined, I just can't go there. But I know it's happening, and there's a lot of tracking going on. And I mean, they call it spyware for a reason.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Patsy, if those aren't the answers, I'm teeing up a softball for you, because in having worked with you for, I don't know, it feels like 100 years now. I know you have a passion for all organization development, but you've got a kind of one particular area that you have a heart for, that seems to be a much better answer to resolving this quiet quitting pandemic. And there's data from Gallup that I'll share in a minute, that potentially supports and suggests this is a better area than surveillance, bringing everybody back unnecessarily, or firing people, or whatever else you might have come up with. So Patsy, where should a listener start?
Well, a lot of the quiet quitting, as we've looked at statistically, is in the frontline workers or the bulk of your workforce.
Mhm.
Those people have managers, and it is a new world. And so managers really need to create accountability. They need to create accountability with care and with heart, as you've been saying, Patrick, for individual performance and for team collaboration, whatever kind of environment we're trying to collaborate in, whether it's face to face or, online, which all contributes to customer value. And ultimately, employees must see how their work contributes to how their work, how the work they're doing contributes to the organization's larger purpose. I want to know that I'm valued.
Mm.
So I think that's where the care comes in. That's where the trust comes in. That's where feedback, that's where, my career path comes in.
Mm. And each of those things, feeling cared for, knowing how my work fits into the bigger picture. Each of those things, though, my manager plays a significant role in helping me in providing clarity. Like, how does my work fit? Why am I doing this?
Yep.
Whatever it is that you're asking me to do. That's, if I'm unclear on that, that's my manager. The data I alluded to, and this is the last piece of data I think I'll throw out today. In yet another Gallup survey on this subject, it suggested that managers are responsible for 70% of the variance between engagement and disengagement.
Yep.
So it doesn't mean, obviously there are other factors, but the old adage that people join organizations and leave managers is still true in 2022. That the stronger my manager is, the better my manager is, the more equipped my manager is, the less likely I am to be among the 50% or more of quiet quitters.
And this is where I think it's really critical for our listeners to listen up, so to speak, is that so many managers find themselves in a management role because they've been good at being an individual contributor, contributing skills, not people skills. So what got them to being a manager isn't going to most of the time get them to be successful as a manager. So that's one important piece. Yeah. And managers, unless you come by it really naturally, can only succeed in cultures where people are engaged and feel like they belong. So you as the leader have got to create that culture, that environment where you're giving your managers the skills they need.
Yep.
That's my soapbox.
Hey, preach it, girl.
That's good.
Can we acknowledge, CEO, listener, we were talking as we were preparing for today that the danger of hearing us say that managers are your best defense against quiet quitting, the danger of hearing that is to think, oh, this is my manager's problem, because not all managers are leaders, but every leader is a manager. Did I say that right? Or maybe that doesn't even make sense. But the point is, you, the listener, right? As a leader, you are also a manager. So everyone who in any kind of authority reporting relationship to one of your people, you play an active role in addressing the quiet quitting pandemic. Leb, what are you thinking?
Well, there's one other thing that is being written about more, and yet it showed up when I've been rereading the 25th anniversary edition of The 7 Habits.
Okay.
There's a really great foreword in there by Jim Collins. And one of the things that I think is also happening is if you're not paying attention to properly resourcing what's needed for people to get the job done, they're going to get frustrated. They're going to be less engaged or disengaged. And I think more of that is happening than we realize, or that some leaders are paying attention to. It's like it's just important. So that's what I was thinking about. Is it's not only managers, it's not only leaders. It's also how we resource people. It's also how we listen and care for each other. And it is very frustrating to be asked to do an important task and not be trained or resourced properly to do a really good job.
It's maddening. Well, and doesn't that come back to how Dan Dennison and the Dennison Culture Survey defines engagement? It says, in order for your employees to feel engaged, they need two things. They need to know what is expected of me, what am I responsible for? And then they need that piece that you just said. They need to know that they need the resources, they need the information, the tools, the data to do what it is that you've asked them to do.
Right.
If they have the information, if they have the resources, but they don't have the authority, that's frustrating. Why am I running this up to you? I can do this. I have the data. Let me do it. It's equally frustrating if you're holding me accountable to do something, but I can't get the tools and the data and the resources that I need. So either one of those is going to impact engagement. 100% right.
Yeah, and if part of the resourcing is I have a team of 6, and we weeded out the quiet quitters, and now I have a team of 4, I have to reshuffle the whole deck and put more on everybody else's plate, and until that changes. So I don't think that's a great strategy.
Right.
Or at least not the initial strategy.
Patsy, that reminds me. You talked about being aware of companies that are choosing. I think this factors into how managers are your best defense against quiet quitting. There are companies that are choosing to ignore the quiet quitting issue, right? They're retaining quiet quitters instead of letting them go because of the concern that of how difficult it is to hire people. Right. So that's actively happening. We may have a listener saying that's exactly right. I can't afford to let these people go, even though they've quiet quit, but they're missing an alternate strategy. And I think that's where management comes in. Can you talk about that?
Well, I'm not sure that I can. Let's see. What did I say earlier? Help me here.
Well, what can a manager do? There's a third option, and that is re-engaging the existing employee, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of what we've been talking about is like, develop. First of all, admit there's something missing. It's not an either or, which is what you had said earlier. And next of all, look at what I need. Look at what you need. Look at what I need. And then how do we develop those skills? It goes a lot to what Lep's just talking about, resourcing. And admit that it doesn't happen overnight. If there are 12 competencies that one needs to learn, then what ones do I already have that I can count on? I care. How can I build on the care I have? And then what's the next one I need to learn? I think that's another liability is we think we've got to learn it all at once. But we're dealing with these little human, biologies here. They don't learn quite so quickly at any age, especially around human interaction, which is really what we're talking about.
Yeah. I think one other thing that comes up for me is, can you talk to a person and design a career conversation versus a job?
Yes.
Because I think a lot of folks, including even myself when I was in my 20s and 30s, is, I wasn't very clear about career at some of the places that I worked. I had a job. And then if you tie career to being in a company that you're excited about their purpose or their mission, you know, the fact that they give back in the community, you know, there's so many factors that can have a person shift and get engaged.
Mm-hmm.
But if you remain in job mode and then you have a manager who doesn't have some of the skills they need, and maybe they feel they can't let that person go, that's what this whole session is all about. So I think it's to some degree, it's always a conversation about what's next that might get you excited. What,
Right.
you know, what training would you like to have?
Yeah.
You know, oh, you would really like to feel more comfortable public speaking. Okay, then let's send you to Toastmasters, you know, whatever the case may be. Or, you know, you're a natural storyteller, but you tell the same stories over and over again. There's just things that can be done.
Why did you
Right.
look at me when you said that?
I didn't.
And so that points to, Lev, the need for me to meet with you, for us to have one-on-ones on a fairly regular basis.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to have a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
I need to ask you questions. I need to hear back from you, and vice versa. And I'm
Yeah.
open to your questions. So
Yeah. And it's safe for me to say to you this is something you do that really frustrates me.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Manager.
And that conversation isn't guaranteed to happen just because you've called me back into the office, nor does my working remotely preclude us from having that conversation
Right.
through the means and technology. So I think let's break down some of the myths. Like one of the things I was thinking as you were talking about that, like quiet quitting or disengagement is not a terminal illness. It's not something that can't be reversed. It's kind of it's a current state, but it's also very changeable. And I think if we're all being honest, if you've worked for any length of time, every one of us has had periods. We've had seasons of very high engagement, and we've had seasons of quiet quitting. And so it's not a judgment or like I said, certainly not something that can't be reversed, which is why, you know, that's what I was getting at before, Patsy. Instead of, you know, you don't have to just put up with it or just fire them. Keep them and re-engage them, and by looking in the mirror and asking, what do we, and asking them, how do we, what would light you up again? What would, you know, having a frank conversation. Hey, I can see, you know, I get the sense it's a harder season for you. How do we fix that? How do we get you excited again?
Mm-hmm.
What would you love?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. The only other thing I'd say that comes up for me that is not necessarily an intensified training kind of piece, but is super important, is just increase your volume, your level of stated appreciation for people.
So glad you brought that one up. And
literally, I'm working with 2 organizations right now where we just close. You know, I'm helping the facilitative leadership piece and creating the agenda. We close every meeting with stated appreciation. It's on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody says something to someone else at the table, in that room, or, you know, on the screen. And when you exercise the muscle of stated appreciation, it spreads. And people like to hear, like, you know, wow, I really appreciated when you stepped in and helped me do this, or what. And people are thinking it, but they don't necessarily speak it. And when that muscle gets built, it so increases vitality and engagement.
Agreed. Are we about at that point where let's get practical?
I think we are at that point.
What do you think? We've covered a lot today. Listener, hopefully you found this to be interesting and that you learned a few things. But as you know from sticking with us through other episodes, we don't want to just have an interesting conversation where nothing changes. So this is the part of every episode where we try to summarize key points that you as a listener can implement in your organization starting today, starting tomorrow, to start, in this case, combating the issue of quiet quitting. Who'd like to go first?
I can go.
Okay.
And I'll leave plenty of room for everyone, for all of us. I think it's practical to monitor and give the resources that are needed to get the job done. I think that giving stated appreciation, which we just talked about, is a practical step that we can just get better and better at. Hold one-on-ones that include relationship as well as productivity.
That's great. It's a really good one.
And I'll give one more. Pay attention to who you are being when you're doing what you're doing. So,
perfect.
Who's next?
Well, I was going to go, but I decided I've lowered the bar, so I'm going to sit this one out. I guess it's not quiet quitting. I'm vocally quitting. No, okay, I'll go.
Yes,
go. We talked in succession about what not to do. So simply bringing your people back into the office without fixing the underlying issues in the culture is not going to solve your quiet quitting problem. You've got to figure out why are people disengaged, and and if you are going to bring them back, as we talked about, you've got to figure out what's different, why. Firing your quiet quitters is not going to solve it either. That it's expensive, it's disruptive, it's taxing to your remaining employees, and it's also a missed opportunity to re-engage them. And then tracking your employees is a really, really bad idea. It's really bad. It will destroy your culture just about as fast as anything else you can come up with. That it's just one of those things that erodes trust. And then I'm gonna I'll throw one more out, and then Patsy, give you an opportunity. As we were saying at the end, quiet quitting is not a terminal illness. It's not an irreversible problem. It's a current state, and it absolutely can be corrected with the people that you have. It's not a them problem. It's usually a culture problem or a leadership, a lack of management. So get to the root of it, and you will see people re-engage. You'll see them. What's the opposite? Quiet hiring? I don't know, but you'll see them choose something else other than quiet quitting.
Excellent.
Patsy,
Thanks.
What do you got?
I have get to know your employees as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob, this one's yours, but self-care is more important than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming, there's more facets of it. I also have create open and trusting environments through psychological safety, to allow each of us to speak our minds and to show up wholly. I think this is one we talked about, is when something's not working or when you're stuck, step back and reflect. How are we doing?
Good.
This one, I thought for sure, Patrick, you would say. tools are more useful when used as a mirror as opposed to a hammer.
Yeah.
There you go. I'll end on that one.
Awesome. Lev, you want to add any more?
Just one more.
Yeah.
Keep developing your people.
Yeah.
We used to talk a lot about lifelong learning, but it's important and things keep changing.
Yeah. I'm going to add two more quick ones. Lev, you made a great point about onboarding. Reevaluate your onboarding because sometimes quiet quitting happens in the first 90 days.
Yep.
Right? There's enough evidence to show that you've got to get that right because it's really hard to recover once you've screwed that up.
Yep.
And then the last one, we spent some time digging into a number of different ways, competencies, but strong managers are your answer to the quiet quitting pandemic.
Yeah.
So
that's a good one.
Develop your managers, invest in them. Don't assume that because they were strong individual contributors, they're going to make great leaders. They can become great leaders, but they're not fully equipped just because they were strong individual contributors.
Yeah, that's really good.
Excellent. That's good.
I thought of one more too.
Awesome.
Just continually work to have meaningful meetings. Because people spend a lot of time in meetings.
Yes. Yep. Excellent.
I think that's a wrap.
I think that's a wrap. That was a good one. I think it was timely. Listener, hopefully you found value in this. If you did, can we ask, we'd love for you to write us a review in any one of the platforms that you are consuming this podcast, wherever you're finding it. Connect with us on LinkedIn. You can find all three of us. We have our own individual LinkedIn profile pages, but we also have a show page. Feel free to pop over and engage with us there. And you will find episode 37's Let's Get Practical on our website at thefrustratedceo.com, where we also have all of our previous episodes and their companion Let's Get Practicals, where you can find lists from every episode of practical things that you can do to implement in your business to start making inroads. Leb and Patsy, thank you so much. I love each of you. I love working with you. You are insightful and fun and creative and smart. So thank you for showing up with your whole selves today.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Listener, thanks for sticking with us for another episode, and we will see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO Podcast.